So, last video I talked about the legendary and mythical Pokemon of X and Y and how they are in the back of everyone's minds due to the lack of inclusion in the Pokemon Legends CA trailer as of this date. I went over the lack of attention given to the X and Y box cover legendaries and then remembered the mythical Pokemon of Generation 6. I saw a Hoopa, which I remember, but then I also saw Volcanion, who I forgot even existed. Just think about it, most mythical Pokemon are actually pretty forgettable. Now, in all fairness, I get that mythical Pokemon by design are supposed to be a myth and are pretty vague Pokemon, but I'm not even talking about the concept of them being pretty vague in lore. It's just that since Gen 5 and 6, you could arguably say that the mythical Pokemon have been as forgettable as ever. Now, I won't even exactly say that it's their fault for being forgettable, it's just that Game Freak has been kind of dropping them very weirdly, as I said in my previous video. Take for instance, probably the most forgettable mythical Pokemon, Zarude. I think it's one of those cases where Game Freak actually just shot themselves in the foot with this Pokemon, as it locked it behind getting a movie ticket. And back when it dropped, I was considering getting a movie ticket, but I just couldn't justify the price just to get the Pokemon, you know. To clarify, the movie tickets were around $40 where I was. And you could say the same thing for Melmetal, as it was locked behind Pokemon Go, and at the time I was playing Pokemon more casually and I wasn't really into it as much as I used to be, and so it was just kind of an afterthought to me. But to me, the most important thing about a mythical Pokemon is their role in the Pokemon world. I think what makes a mythical Pokemon memorable is if they have a purpose, which is why I think the last memorable mythical Pokemon that we really got is Hoopa, honestly. I was gonna say Marshadow and Zeraora because they were just cool Pokemon, but that's just it. They were just cool Pokemon. They really actually didn't do much after the generations they debuted in. Like, for instance, Mew is the Pokemon with all genes, Celebi is a Pokemon that time travels, Jirachi is a Pokemon that grants wishes, Deoxys opened up the concept of Pokemon in space, Darkrai is the living nightmare, and Shaman's just adorable, you know. Pokemon like Arceus is literally the god Pokemon. I mean, Hoopa is somebody who just messes around and summons legendary Pokemon, and after that, all the other Pokemon are just really niche. Like, Keldeo is especially the prime example of this. It's just a 4-set to the legendary trio. Meloetta just sings. Genesect is just an experiment on a fossil Pokemon. You can even say Magearna isn't really that much of a mythical so much. And then the two Pokemon from the most shadow dropped movies, Volcanion and Zarude, they just kind of like, I don't even know what they do, honestly. Like, to me personally, for a mythical Pokemon to be memorable, they have to do something. Like, I think Pecharunt was like a fine example of giving a mythical Pokemon a niche purpose and making it rememberable, you know? But at the same time, I will say obscurity is not necessarily a bad thing. I'm actually a huge fan of Pokemon like Meloetta, Keldeo, and Marshadow. I think they're really cool Pokemon. And I guess you could say the main reason why they are faded into obscurity is that, unlike the legendary Pokemon, Game Freak really doesn't typically bring these Pokemon back, so they're pretty much catchable in their generation and not anywhere else. But by far, I think the real reason why these Pokemon faded into obscurity is either they didn't have that much spotlight in the meta of battling, or they just kind of had better replacements now. But besides that, I'm not making this video to say that the mythical Pokemon suck or anything. I just wish they were brought back a little more frequently than they are. And I'm not saying to bring them back to the extent of the legendary Pokemon, but honestly, some of these Pokemon need some love, you know. Genesect hasn't really been used much, and I think it needs some buffs or something, you know. But yeah, I just wanted to talk about the mythical Pokemon since last video. It just popped into my head that these Pokemon really haven't been getting that much love. And yeah, just I hope Game Freak, when they do decide to make Gen 10 and, you know, show us a mythical Pokemon, they give them more of a purpose in the world, you know. Like I said, Pecharunt was a pretty fine example of that, but I just don't want shadow drops like Zarude again, you know. I think the perfect Pokemon to describe something as being very niche but also very purposeful is something like Celebi, you know. It just kind of wanders around in time, not really doing much outside of that, and it's just very niche, but it's very memorable because it has something in the world, you know. But yes, Game Freak, Gen 10 mythical Pokemon, please make them pretty good and rememberable. Please, I'm begging.